In the American heartland of the 19th century, family routines were marked by simple, repetitive tasks. The day began early, almost always before sunrise. The father would leave for the fields, the workshop, or the small local business. In rural areas of Michigan, New York, and Ohio, where many Adventists settled after the 1840s, the landscape consisted of modest farms, dirt roads, and small communities where almost everyone knew each other. Life was organized around agricultural production, home reading, and restricted family gatherings. The father was, above all, responsible for the material stability of the home. He managed the crops, negotiated products in the local market, and took care of the family's legal decisions. In the American context of that period, the paternal figure was understood as a civil and moral authority within the home, reflecting the broader model of Protestant society. This pattern was not exclusive to Adventists. It was part of the American social imaginary of the 19th century. What differentiated many Adventist families was the way they integrated regular religious reading and domestic discipline into daily life. Following the Great Disappointment of 1844, many who remained connected to the movement that would later organize itself as the Seventh-day Adventist Church cautiously reorganized their family routines. Public disappointment had exposed the group to ridicule and suspicion. In response, domestic life became even more reserved and structured. The father assumed the role of mediator between the outside world and the family, filtering influences and protecting the home's reputation. Reading aloud was a common practice. In the evenings, after work, many families gathered around the table or fireplace. The father often led the reading of the Bible and Adventist periodicals, such as the Review and Herald, founded in 1850. These moments were not described as elaborate ceremonies, but as a natural part of daily discipline. Letters preserved in denominational archives show parents advising children on behavior, finances, and the choice of friendships. The central concern was to form stable and responsible character in a country that was rapidly expanding westward. In rural areas, children learned early on to work alongside their fathers. Boys participated in farming, animal husbandry, and small construction projects. This hands-on experience strengthened family bonds and imparted essential skills. The father taught basic arithmetic for negotiations, sufficient reading comprehension to keep up with newspapers and agricultural instructions, as well as principles of household organization. Formal education was still limited in many regions, and the home played a central role in intellectual development. Beginning in the 1860s, with the formal organization of the church in 1863, Adventism began to structure educational institutions. The emergence of Battle Creek College in 1874 in Battle Creek reflected a gradual shift. Even so, the father remained the primary educational figure in the daily lives of most families. The decision to send a child to study required financial planning and institutional trust. Not all families could do without domestic labor. The paternal figure was also linked to Sabbath observance, a distinctive practice of the group since the 1840s. In communities where the Sabbath was not recognized as a civil day of rest, the father needed to negotiate work schedules or accept financial losses. Records indicate cases where Adventist farmers left harvests waiting or refused contracts that required work on the Sabbath. These decisions were not presented as heroic acts, but as practical choices made with deliberation and often economic sacrifice. During the American Civil War between 1861 and 1865, the role of the father took on additional dimensions. Some Adventist men sought non-combatant positions, aligning themselves with the pacifist stance prevalent in the group at that time. Temporary absence or indirect involvement in the war altered domestic dynamics. Letters sent from the front or medical service camps reveal fathers concerned with maintaining order and family faith in their absence. The home needed to continue functioning under maternal leadership, but the father figure remained a moral reference even from a distance. Ellen G. White appears in several accounts as a keen observer of Adventist family life. In her writings, she described tired fathers after work, overburdened mothers, and children learning to read by lamplight. Her notes were not idealizations, but portraits of a community in formation, facing economic limitations and social prejudice. According to many records, Paternal discipline should be firm, yet balanced. Excessive severity was criticized, as was neglect. At the end of the 19th century, with the institutional growth of Adventism and its expansion to other states and countries, the Adventist father figure began to adapt. Even so, the core remained similar to the beginning: provider, home educator, and representative of the family before the community. Authority was exercised within the cultural parameters of the time, but shaped by the awareness of belonging to a minority religious movement that sought stability and public respect. Thus, by observing the daily lives of these families, it becomes clear that the role of parents was not limited to a specific religious function, but integrated work, education, social reputation, and moral discipline during a period of institutional consolidation that would prepare the ground for transformations in the following decades. As the second half of the 19th century progressed, the daily lives of Adventist families began to reflect broader changes in American society. The growth of cities, the expansion of railroads, and the strengthening of the press altered the rhythm of everyday life. Even so, in many Adventist homes, especially in the Midwestern states, the routine. Have you ever wondered what it was like to be a dad 100 years ago? Not just any dad, but a Seventh-day Adventist father during a really transformative time in history. From the late 1800s to the early 1900s, the world was changing at lightning speed, and so was the role of fathers within the Adventist community. Let's dive into this fascinating story and see how these men navigated their faith, their families, and a rapidly modernizing world. Back in the late 19th century, the ideal Adventist father was often seen as the undisputed head of the household, a spiritual leader and a strict disciplinarian. This model was heavily influenced by Victorian-era values, which emphasized a patriarchal family structure. For Adventists, this was amplified by a deep sense of religious duty. The father was not just providing for his family financially. He was responsible for their spiritual salvation. His primary role was to lead his family in worship, enforce Sabbath observance, and ensure his children were raised in the fear and admonition of the Lord. Think of him as the family's pastor and principal, all rolled into one. Life was often rural and agrarian. Many Adventist families lived on farms where work and home life were completely intertwined. The father's authority was tied to his role as the manager of the farm and the primary breadwinner. He taught his sons practical skills like farming and carpentry, while the mother taught the daughters domestic duties. This division of labor was clear-cut. Family worship was a cornerstone of daily life, with the father leading out in Bible study and prayer every morning and evening. Publications from the time, like the Review and Herald, were filled with articles encouraging fathers to take this spiritual leadership role seriously. They were warned against being too lenient, as the salvation of their children's souls was seen as their sacred trust. One of the most influential voices during this period was Ellen G. White. Her writings provided detailed guidance on nearly every aspect of family life, and fathers were no exception. She painted a picture of the ideal father as one who was firm yet loving, a man of prayer who governed his household with wisdom and patience. She stressed the importance of a father's example, writing that his actions spoke louder than his words. He was to be a representation of God's character to his children, just, merciful, and full of love. However, she also cautioned against harshness and tyranny. A father who ruled with an iron fist, she argued, would only alienate his children and drive them away from God. Her counsel aimed to balance authority with affection, creating a home that was a little heaven on earth. But as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, things started to shift. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and society was becoming more urbanized. Families began moving from farms to cities in search of work. This move had a profound impact on the family structure. For many Adventist men, their work was no longer at home. They left for factories, offices, or other jobs, often spending long hours away from their families. This physical separation began to change the father's role. He was still the primary provider, but he was less involved in the day-to-day running of the household and the children's upbringing. This shift created new challenges. With fathers away at work, mothers naturally took on a more central role in the children's daily spiritual and educational development. The father's role as the primary spiritual guide began to be shared and in some cases delegated. Adventist publications started to reflect this change. While still emphasizing the father's ultimate responsibility, they also began to address the new realities of urban life. Articles appeared that encouraged fathers to make the most of the time they did have with their families. The emphasis shifted from constant oversight to quality time. Evening worship and Sabbath activities became even more crucial moments for fathers to connect with their children and impart spiritual values. Furthermore, the early 20th century saw the rise of new ideas about child psychology and education. The old model of breaking the will was gradually being replaced by more progressive ideas that emphasized understanding and nurturing a child's individuality. This influenced the Adventist perspective on fatherhood as well. While discipline was still important, the focus began to shift towards building a relationship based on love and respect. Ellen White's later writings also reflected this evolution, placing a greater emphasis on fathers being companions and friends to their children. She encouraged them to take an interest in their children's play, to understand their struggles, and to be approachable sources of counsel and support. This new ideal was that of a companionate father. He was still a leader, but his leadership was expressed more through gentle guidance and partnership with his wife than through absolute authority. This was a significant departure from the stern patriarch of the previous generation. The church's educational and health institutions also played a role in shaping this new model. Adventist schools and sanitariums promoted a holistic view of health, spiritual, mental, and physical, which extended to family dynamics. They taught that a happy, well-balanced home was essential for raising healthy, well-adjusted children, and the father's emotional availability was a key ingredient. So you see a fascinating transition. The Adventist father of the late 19th century was the patriarch, the priest of his home, his authority unquestioned. His world was one of agrarian life, strict discipline, and a heavy sense of spiritual duty. By the early 20th century, while these core responsibilities remained, the expression of fatherhood began to soften and adapt. The move to cities, the separation of work and home, and new ideas about child development all contributed to the emergence of a more companionate, emotionally engaged father. He was learning to be not just a provider and a priest, but also a partner to his wife and a friend to his children. This evolution wasn't always smooth, and there was often a tension between the old ideal and the new reality. Men struggled to balance the demands of modern work with their desire to be present and involved fathers. But through it all, the core commitment to raising children in the faith remained the guiding principle. The story of the Adventist father from this period is a powerful reminder that while circumstances change, the fundamental calling of fatherhood to love, lead, and nurture the next generation endures. It's a legacy of faith and family that continues to shape Adventist communities today. Thanks so much for watching. What are your thoughts on how fatherhood has changed over the years? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this interesting, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into history and faith. See you next time. As the 20th century dawned, the world was changing fast, and for Seventh-day Adventist families, life was transforming right along with it. The rural agricultural world of the 19th century was giving way to bustling cities, industrial growth, and a whole new way of life. For fathers, this meant navigating a landscape filled with both new opportunities and unprecedented challenges. Imagine this: the Adventist movement is growing, not just as a faith, but as a network of institutions. Hospitals, schools, and publishing houses are popping up in urban centers. This created a new professional world for Adventist men. A father could now find work as an administrator, a teacher, a nurse, or even a typesetter for publications like the Review and Herald. He was no longer just a farmer tied to the land. He was part of a larger, organized structure. But this came with a price. City life meant economic competition and the constant pressure of an industrializing society. Still, the core responsibility of being the family's financial provider remained unshakable. The household budget was a father's domain, and it had to stretch further than ever before. Rent, city-appropriate clothing, and food were just the beginning. A new, significant expense was education. As the church expanded its network of schools, parents were encouraged to keep their children in formal education for longer. An academic background was now seen as essential, a pathway for the next generation to serve within the denomination or enter specialized professions. Even as the world outside grew louder and more complex, life inside the Adventist home aimed for order and discipline. The tradition of nightly family worship and reading continued, though now the books were often fresh from the church's own printing presses. Fathers still led these quiet moments, even after a long, tiring day at a desk or in a hospital. Family diaries from the time tell us that the urban night was anything but silent. The clatter of carts, the whistle of trains, and the constant hum of the city replaced the quiet of the countryside. Yet the goal was to create a sanctuary of predictability and peace within their four walls. Relationships between parents and children were also evolving. The turn of the century sparked new conversations about education, discipline, and health. The sanitary and temperance movements, which championed hygiene and healthy living, found a receptive audience in Adventist homes. Fathers often took the lead in enforcing these new rules, which were heavily influenced by the health principles promoted by Adventist medical pioneers. This meant overseeing everything from diet to daily schedules, translating broad health reforms into the practical reality of family life. Life also became more mobile. The church's missionary and administrative expansion meant that families were on the move. A father might be called to a new position in another state to help open a new school or to join a medical project. This required immense adaptability from wives and children, who constantly had to adjust to new neighborhoods, new friends, and new routines. Through all this change, the father remained the constant, the anchor providing a sense of continuity even when their entire world was being uprooted. Ellen G. White, a foundational figure in the church who lived until 1915, watched this transition closely. In her letters and writings, she voiced the concerns of many parents. They worried about the growing influence of urban culture on their children, the new forms of entertainment, the different social habits. She described fathers trying to find that delicate balance between being firm in their principles and being understanding of the new social realities their children were facing. It was a different world than the one they had grown up in, and they knew it. Work itself became more specialized. Fathers were no longer just general laborers. They needed specific technical skills. Many invested in further training, taking courses offered by Adventist institutions. This created a powerful link between their professional lives and their religious identity, but it also added to their responsibilities. The time available for family could shrink, forcing a conscious effort to reorganize priorities and protect precious moments together. Despite all these monumental shifts, some things held fast. The family dinner table remained the heart of the home, a place for guidance, conversation, and connection. Major decisions about a child's education, their first job, or community involvement were still guided by a father's wisdom. And the family's public reputation was seen as a direct reflection of the father's character and conduct. In the close-knit Adventist communities, his behavior, both professionally and socially, shaped how the entire religious group was perceived by the wider world. Looking back, it's clear that the role of the Adventist father was anything but static. It bent and adapted to the powerful economic and cultural currents of the early 20th century. The father of this era was a fascinating blend of old and new. He carried the discipline and conviction of his 19th century farming ancestors, but he operated in a far more complex, institutionalized world. This complexity was especially evident as the church's main institutions began a major move from Battle Creek, Michigan to Tacoma Park, Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C. This wasn't just a change of address. It was a fundamental reorganization that reshaped the lives of countless families who followed. The establishment of the General Conference headquarters in Tacoma Park cemented a more structured corporate model for the church's administration. For many fathers, this meant becoming regular employees of the organization. They were now accountants, editors, and administrators working in a formal, bureaucratic environment. They left for work at a set time, dressed in office attire. This new reality offered the security of a steady salary, but it demanded an adjustment to formal rules, detailed reports, and rigid schedules. It was a world away from the farm, but it was the future. This unique combination of continuity and adaptation would go on to shape Adventist family life for generations, setting the stage for the discussions and debates that would define the decades to come. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this glimpse into the past interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories about history, faith, and family. We'll see you in the next one. Ever wondered how the role of a father has changed over time? Let's take a journey back to the 19th and early 20th centuries and explore the life of a father in an Adventist family. It's a story of change, challenge, and enduring values. Back in the 19th century, the Adventist father was the rock of the family. Whether living on a farm or in a small town, his main job was to provide. He was the one ensuring there was food on the table and a roof over everyone's head. But his role went far beyond just being the breadwinner. He was the organizer of the daily routine, the person who set the schedule and made sure life at home ran smoothly. He was also the public face of the family, responsible for upholding their reputation within a young and growing religious community. Guiding his children's education and spiritual life was a key part of his duty, shaping the next generation of believers. As the years rolled on and the Seventh-day Adventist Church began to grow and establish itself more formally, the father's world started to expand. The home environment itself began to reflect this change. It wasn't uncommon for a father to bring home documents from work, discussing decisions about schools, hospitals, or missionary projects right at the dinner table. He was plugged into the bigger picture of the church's mission. Education for children became a much bigger deal. The Adventist school system was taking root, and it was widely expected that kids would get a solid academic foundation. Fathers were deeply involved in these decisions, choosing the right school, dealing with discipline, and talking about future careers. They encouraged their children to pursue paths in education, medicine, or church administration, but they also saw the value in stable secular jobs. Inside the home, the father was still the clear authority figure, but the way he exercised that authority was starting to soften. New ideas about child rearing discussed in magazines and at church meetings promoted a less rigid approach to discipline. Still, he was the one who set the curfew, made sure homework got done, and upheld the family's standards of behavior. And of course, the Sabbath was the anchor of the week. Even as cities grew busier and commerce became more intense, the father made sure the family preserved this sacred day of rest. He organized activities and set the tone for a day of spiritual renewal and family connection. After 1915, Ellen G. White was no longer physically present, but her influence was stronger than ever. Her writings were widely read in Adventist homes. Fathers and mothers would read her advice, written decades earlier, and figure out how to apply it to their modern lives. Family reading, especially on Friday evenings, was still a cherished tradition, even as new technologies started to appear. Imagine this: homes that once relied on oil lamps were now glowing with electric light. The radio was beginning to emerge as a fascinating new gadget, and American society was becoming a vibrant mix of different cultures. It was a time of exciting change, but also new challenges. World War I brought a whole new level of tension. Adventist families once again had to navigate the issue of military service, this time on a global scale. Fathers found themselves under immense pressure, needing to register their sons for the draft while negotiating for non-combatant roles that aligned with their beliefs. Letters from that time show just how worried parents were about their children's safety and the public image of their faith. The father stood at the crossroads, mediating between the demands of the state and the convictions of his conscience. Then came the Roaring Twenties. This decade brought a wave of cultural shifts, new fashions, new forms of entertainment, and a new spirit of independence among young people. Fathers watched these changes with a cautious eye. As cities grew, so did the access to movie theaters, popular music, and a wider range of social activities. For many Adventist dads, the answer wasn't to completely isolate their families. Instead, they focused on careful regulation, trying to find a balance between participating in the world and maintaining their unique family and spiritual identity. So, when we look back at this entire period, from the pioneering days of the 1840s to the bustling 1920s, we see three pillars that consistently define the father's role. He was the economic provider, The leader at home and the family's representative to the outside world. The world around him changed dramatically. The rugged farmer gave way to the organized administrator or the professional working within the church's institutions. But the core expectation of him as a stable moral leader never faded. The father in these Adventist families wasn't just a product of his religion. He was also a reflection of the broader American culture of his time, adapting its patterns to fit the needs of a growing faith community. From fields lit by the moon to offices lit by electric bulbs, his presence was the organizing force in domestic life. He navigated a period of constant transformation, and in doing so, he helped shape the very fabric of Adventism for generations to come. It's a powerful legacy of leadership, faith, and family. Thanks so much for watching and taking this historical journey with us. If you found this interesting, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories like this one. See you next time.